The scream that tore from Rebecca Jane Johnson's throat echoed through the dusty streets of Lovelock, Nevada, drawing curious faces to windows and doorways on that sweltering afternoon in June of 1882. She stood in the middle of Main Street, her cream-colored wedding dress billowing in the hot desert wind, her dark hair falling loose from its carefully arranged pins, and her green eyes blazing with a fury that made even the hardened miners step back. In her trembling hand, she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, the ink still fresh, the words still burning into her mind like a brand on cattle hide. $3,000, she whispered, her voice raw and broken. $3,000 gone, everything we saved for 2 years. The door to the Silver Spur saloon swung open, and her fiancé stumbled out into the harsh sunlight, his face pale beneath days of stubble, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. Charles Whitmore looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. His expensive suit, the one she had helped him pick out for their wedding tomorrow, was rumpled and stained with whiskey, and God knows what else. "Rebecca, please," he stammered, reaching for her with shaking hands. "I can explain. I thought I could win it back. I had a sure thing, a guaranteed hand, and then you lost everything," she said, her voice cutting through his excuses like a knife through butter. "Not just the wedding fund, Charles, the money for the house, the money for the ranch we were going to buy, my inheritance from my grandmother, the money I earned working at the dress shop for 18 months. All of it. Gone." A crowd had gathered now, forming a rough circle around the two of them. Rebecca felt their eyes on her, felt their pity and their judgment in equal measure. She had come to Lovelock 6 months ago from Sacramento, California, following Charles after he had promised her a new life in Nevada, a fresh start away from the crowded city. He had written her letters full of promises about the opportunities in the silver mining towns, about the fortune they would make together, about the family they would raise in the clear desert air. "I will fix this," Charles said, his voice desperate. "I will get the money back. I just need another stake, one more chance at the tables, and I can—" "You will do nothing," Rebecca interrupted. "Because we are done, Charles. The wedding is canceled. Whatever we had between us is finished." She turned away from him, her skirt swirling in the dust, and began walking down the street with no clear destination in mind. Behind her, she heard Charles calling her name, heard the murmur of the crowd, but she did not look back. She could not look back, because if she did, she might see the ruins of everything she had hoped for, everything she had dreamed about during those long nights in Sacramento, when she had sewn dresses by candlelight to add to their wedding fund. Rebecca did not know where she was going until her feet carried her to the edge of town, past the last of the wooden buildings and out into the scrubland where sagebrush and desert grass grew in defiant patches. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She sank down onto a large rock, her carefully pressed wedding dress spreading around her like the petals of a wilted flower, and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for the fool she had been, trusting a man who had shown signs of his weakness even back in California. She cried for the life she had imagined, the children she had pictured, the home she had wanted to build. She cried for her grandmother's money, earned through decades of hard work as a seamstress, meant to give her granddaughter a better start than she herself had known. Most of all, she cried because she was alone in a town where she knew almost no one, with barely enough money left to her name to buy a stagecoach ticket back to California, back to a life she had already said goodbye to. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. A rider was approaching from the direction of town, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he drew closer, she recognized him as one of the ranch hands she had seen around Lovelock, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that hung just past his collar. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot, his body moving in perfect rhythm with his horse. He reined in a few yards away from her and dismounted, looping his horse's reins over a nearby bush. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his hat in his hands, his brown eyes taking in her tear-stained face and crumpled wedding dress with an expression she could not quite read. "Madam," he said finally, his voice deep and gentle, "I am sorry to intrude. My name is Robert Thomas, though most folks just call me Rob. I work at the Double T Ranch about 5 miles north of here. I was in town today when I heard what happened, and I saw you walking out this way. I wanted to make sure you were all right." Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. "Do I look all right to you, Mr. Thomas?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable, turning his hat in his hands. "No, madam, you do not." "I reckon that was a foolish question. But what I meant to ask is, are you safe? Do you have somewhere to go, someone to look after you?" The kindness in his voice threatened to undo her completely. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I have a room at the boarding house on 4th Street. Mrs. Patterson has been kind enough to let me stay there while I prepared for the wedding. I suppose I can remain there for a few more days while I figure out what to do next." Robert Thomas nodded slowly, then moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with a strong jaw and eyes that held an unexpected warmth. There was a scar on his left cheekbone, a thin white line that suggested some past violence, but his expression was nothing but concerned. "I do not mean to speak out of turn," he said carefully, "but I feel compelled to say something. What Charles Whitmore did to you, gambling away your future like that, it is not just foolish, it is cruel and selfish and wrong. You deserve better than him, Miss Johnson. You deserve a man who would protect what you have built together, not throw it away on the turn of a card." Rebecca stared at him, surprised by the passion in his voice, by the way his hands had clenched into fists at his sides when he spoke about Charles. "You do not even know me, Mr. Thomas. Why should you care what happens to me?" He met her eyes directly, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Because I know what it is like to trust someone who does not deserve it. Because I know what it is like to have your dreams torn away by someone else's weakness. And because no woman should have to sit alone in the desert crying in her wedding dress. Because the man she planned to marry cared more about his next bet than about her." The sun had dropped below the mountains now, and the desert was painted in shades of purple and deep blue. The temperature was beginning to drop, with the characteristic swiftness of the Nevada desert, and Rebecca shivered despite herself. Robert immediately shrugged off his jacket, a worn leather vest, over a clean but faded blue shirt, and held it out to her. "Please," he said, "it is going to get cold fast, and that dress was not made for desert nights." She hesitated, then accepted the jacket, pulling it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and sage and horses, a clean, honest smell that was somehow comforting. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas. You are very kind." "Rob," he corrected gently. "And I am not being kind, Miss Johnson. I am just doing what any decent person should do. Can I give you a ride back to town? It is not safe to be out here after dark. There are rattlesnakes and coyotes, and worse things, too." Rebecca nodded, suddenly exhausted. The emotional storm of the day had drained her completely, leaving her feeling hollow and fragile. Rob helped her to her feet with careful hands, as though she were made of spun glass, and then boosted her up onto his horse before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, steady and warm, and she found herself leaning back against his chest, too tired to care about propriety. They rode back to Lovelock in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. The town was lit up now, lanterns glowing in windows, the saloons alive with music and laughter. Rob guided his horse down the side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare where people might see and gossip, and pulled up in front of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Rebecca down. His hand spanned her waist, strong and sure, and for just a moment, they stood there in the darkness, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell, and handed her down gently. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly, "for everything. You did not have to do any of this." Rob smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges that sun and work had carved there. "I know. I wanted to. Miss Johnson, I hope you will not think me too forward, but if you need anything while you decide what to do next, the Double T Ranch is easy to find. Just follow the north road out of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction." "Why would you offer that?" she asked, searching his face in the dim light from the boarding house windows. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "You could be," he agreed, "but you are not. You are a woman who worked 18 months in a dress shop to save money for her future. You are a woman with the courage to call off a wedding in front of half the town rather than marry a man who betrayed your trust. You are a woman sitting alone in the desert in her wedding dress, still trying to hold her head high. That tells me everything I need to know about you, Miss Johnson." He tipped his hat to her, mounted his horse in one smooth motion, and rode away into the darkness, leaving Rebecca standing on the boarding house porch with his jacket still around her shoulders and his words echoing in her mind. The next morning dawned clear and hot, as most mornings did in Nevada in June. Rebecca woke in her small room at the boarding house, disoriented for a moment before the events of the previous day came rushing back. The wedding dress hung on the back of the door, a white ghost of dreams that would never be realized. She forced herself out of bed, washed her face in the basin on the dresser, and dressed in one of her simple day dresses, a practical gray cotton that had seen better days. Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen when Rebecca came downstairs, her round face creased with sympathy. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, pulling Rebecca into a warm embrace that smelled of flour and cinnamon. "I heard what happened, that rotten scoundrel. I never did trust Charles Whitmore, always had a shifty look about him. You are well rid of him, though I know that does not ease the hurt." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Rebecca said, accepting a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs and biscuits. "I am trying to decide what to do next. I have enough money for a stagecoach ticket back to California, but the thought of returning with my tail between my legs, having to explain to everyone what happened." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, sitting down across from her at the kitchen table. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. You did nothing wrong. That man gambled away your future, but that does not mean you have to give up on building a life here in Nevada if you want to stay. Have you thought about finding work in Lovelock?" Rebecca sipped her coffee, considering. "What kind of work would be available? I can sew, and I have experience running a dress shop. I can keep books and do figures, but I do not know if there is demand for those skills in a small mining town." Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up. "As a matter of fact, I heard just yesterday that Mrs. Chen, who runs the general store, is looking for help. Her husband hurt his back in a mining accident, and she needs someone who can manage the store a few days a week while she tends to him. It does not pay much, but it would be enough to cover your room and board here, with a little left over." Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest, small and tentative. "Do you think she would consider me? I have no references here in Nevada." "I will vouch for you," Mrs. Patterson said decisively. "You have been a model boarder these past 6 months, always punctual with your rent, always clean and considerate. That counts for something. Why do not you go over to the general store this afternoon and speak with Mrs. Chen?" Rebecca did exactly that. The general store was a large wooden building on the corner of Main Street and 2nd Avenue, its windows displaying everything from mining equipment to bolts of fabric to jars of candy. Mrs. Chen was a small, energetic woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She looked Rebecca up and down, asked her a series of rapid-fire questions about her experience and her reasons for wanting to stay in Lovelock, and then nodded briskly. "You start tomorrow morning," she said. 6 days a week, 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, Sundays off. I pay $15 a month plus a discount on any goods you need from the store. You will handle customers, manage inventory, keep the books balanced, and help with anything else that needs doing. Can you do that?" "Yes, madam," Rebecca said, relief flooding through her. "I can and I will. Thank you for this opportunity." Mrs. Chen waved a hand dismissively. "Do not thank me yet. Wait until you have dealt with the miners after they get paid on Friday nights, all of them drunk and thinking they are God's gift to women. You will earn every penny of that $15, I promise you that." Rebecca left the general store feeling lighter than she had since the previous afternoon. She had a job, which meant she had a path forward, a way to support herself without having to crawl back to California in defeat. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking around Lovelock, seeing the town with new eyes now that it would be her home for the foreseeable future. Lovelock was not a large town, with a population of perhaps 800 souls, most of them drawn by the promise of silver in the nearby mountains. It had the typical layout of a western mining town, a main street lined with businesses, side streets with houses and boarding houses, and the rougher establishments on the edge of town, where gambling and drinking and other less savory activities took place. The Humboldt River ran a few miles to the south, providing precious water in the harsh desert landscape. As she walked, Rebecca noticed the curious looks from townsfolk, heard the whispers that followed in her wake. Everyone knew about the canceled wedding, about Charles gambling away their money. She held her head high, refusing to show shame for something that was not her fault, but it still stung to be the subject of gossip and speculation. She was passing the livery stable when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Johnson? Good afternoon." Rebecca turned to see Rob Thomas leading his horse out of the stable, a bag of supplies slung over his shoulder. In the full light of day, she could appreciate details she had missed the night before, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the ends, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his work shirt. "Mr. Thomas," she said, feeling her cheeks warm. "Rob, good afternoon. I wanted to return your jacket. I realized I still had it this morning." "Keep it for now," he said easily. "You might need it on another cool evening. Did you sleep all right?" "Well enough, considering," Rebecca admitted. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness yesterday. You did not have to help me, but you did, and I will not forget that." Rob shifted his weight, looking almost bashful. "It was nothing, truly. Have you decided what you're going to do? Are you staying in Lovelock or heading back to California?" "Staying, actually," Rebecca said, and was surprised by how good it felt to say it out loud. "Mrs. Chen at the general store hired me this afternoon. I start tomorrow." The smile that spread across Rob's face was genuine and warm. "That is wonderful news. I am glad you are staying. Lovelock could use more people like you, people with backbone and determination. Mrs. Chen is tough but fair. You will do well there." They stood there in the dusty street, the afternoon sun beating down on them, and Rebecca found herself not wanting the conversation to end. "You said you work at the Double T Ranch? What do you do there?" "I am the foreman," Rob said. "I manage the day-to-day operations, supervise the other ranch hands, handle the cattle and horses. The owner, Mr. Theodore Taylor, is getting on in years, and his son is not interested in ranching, so I run most of the operation now. It is hard work, but I love it. There is something about working the land, raising good horses and cattle, that feels right to me." "How long have you been in Nevada?" Rebecca asked. 5 years now. I came out from Texas in 1877, looking for a fresh start after my family lost our ranch in a drought. Mr. Taylor took a chance on me when I was just a kid with more ambition than sense, and I have been at the Double T ever since. I worked my way up from ranch hand to foreman, saved every penny I could. I am hoping to buy my own place someday, build something that belongs to me. There was a wistfulness in his voice when he talked about owning his own ranch that Rebecca understood instinctively. It was the same longing she had felt when she dreamed about the house she and Charles were going to buy, the life they were going to build together. Except Rob's dreams had not been gambled away by someone else's weakness. "I hope you get your ranch," Rebecca said softly. "You clearly work hard for it. You deserve to see your dreams come true." Rob looked at her intently, and she saw something shift in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken. "So do you, Miss Johnson. Just because one dream did not work out does not mean you cannot build new ones, better ones." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of shouting erupted from the direction of the Silver Spur saloon. Both of them turned to see Charles Whitmore stumbling out into the street, clearly drunk despite it being only mid-afternoon. He caught sight of Rebecca and began staggering toward her, his face twisted with a mixture of anger and self-pity. "Rebecca," he called out, slurring her name. "We need to talk. You cannot just throw away what we had. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you." Rob stepped slightly in front of Rebecca, not aggressively, but protectively. "Mr. Whitmore, I think Miss Johnson made her feelings clear yesterday. You should go sleep off the whiskey." Charles focused on Rob with bleary eyes, swaying on his feet. "Who the hell are you? Her new beau? Is that it, Rebecca? You throw me away and immediately find some cowboy to replace me?" "That is enough," Rob said, his voice hardening. "You are drunk and making a fool of yourself. Go home." "I do not take orders from hired help," Charles spat, lurching forward. He tried to push past Rob to get to Rebecca, but Rob caught his arm with one hand, holding him in place with seemingly no effort. "Listen to me very carefully," Rob said, his voice low and dangerous. "You gambled away this woman's future. You broke her trust and her heart. You do not get to harass her in the street now because you are feeling sorry for yourself. If you have any decency left in you, you will leave her alone and let her move on with her life." Charles jerked his arm free, nearly falling over from the momentum. "You think you are better than me, cowboy? You think you can give her what I could have given her? You are just a ranch hand. She was going to marry a businessman, someone with prospects." "She was going to marry a gambler and a drunk," Rob corrected coldly. I would say she dodged a bullet. Now get out of here before I drag you back to the saloon myself. For a moment, Charles looked like he might swing at Rob. Then common sense or cowardice won out, and he turned and shuffled back toward the saloon, muttering under his breath. Rob watched him go, his jaw tight, his hands still clenched into fists at his sides. I am sorry you had to see that, Rebecca said quietly. He was not always like this. When I first met him in California, he was charming and ambitious and full of plans for the future. I do not know when the gambling started, or maybe I just did not want to see it. Rob turned back to her, and the anger drained from his face, replaced by concern. You do not have to explain or justify anything to me. People change, or sometimes they just show you who they really are underneath. Either way, it is not your fault. Thank you for intervening, Rebecca said. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been here. You would have handled it, Rob said with confidence. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, Miss Johnson, but I am glad I was here anyway. He glanced up at the sun, gauging the time. I should get back to the ranch. We have a mare about to foal, and I want to be there when it happens. But I meant what I said last night. If you need anything, you know where to find me. He tipped his hat to her and walked back to where his horse was waiting. Rebecca watched him mount up and ride out of town, headed north toward the Double T Ranch, and felt a confusing swirl of emotions in her chest. Gratitude certainly for his kindness and protection. But there was something else there too, something warm and unsettling that she was not quite ready to name. The days began to blur together in a routine that was both comforting and exhausting. Rebecca threw herself into her work at the general store, learning the inventory, memorizing prices, getting to know the regular customers. Mrs. Chen was a demanding boss, but a fair one, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to praise good work. Rebecca found herself enjoying the busy pace, the constant stream of customers, the feeling of being useful and productive. The miners were indeed a challenge, especially on Friday evenings, when they came in flush with pay and looking to spend it. Rebecca learned to deflect crude comments with a cool stare, to shortchange troublemakers without them noticing, to call for help from the stock boy when someone got too insistent. She also learned which customers were honest folk just trying to make a living, which ones had families waiting at home, which ones were kind beneath the rough exteriors. Charles continued to make a nuisance of himself for the first week, showing up at the general store or the boarding house with slurred apologies and grandiose promises to win back the money he had lost. Rebecca refused to see him, and eventually Mrs. Patterson banned him from the boarding house entirely after he tried to force his way up to Rebecca's room one night. After that, he seemed to give up, or perhaps he simply found a new obsession. Rebecca heard through the town gossip that he had been seen at the gambling tables every night, sinking deeper into debt and drink. She felt a pang of sorrow for the man he had been, or the man she had thought he was, but no temptation to go back to him. Rob had been right. She deserved better than someone who would throw away their future on the turn of a card. Rob himself became a regular fixture in Rebecca's new life, though she suspected he was finding more excuses than necessary to come into town. He would stop by the general store to pick up supplies for the ranch, always managing to arrive during a slow period when they could talk. He would be in town on Saturday afternoons, claiming he had business with the bank or the land office, and would somehow end up walking Rebecca back to the boarding house when she finished work. He never overstepped, never made her feel uncomfortable, but his interest was clear in the way his eyes lit up when he saw her, in the way he listened intently to everything she said. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these encounters, found herself disappointed on days when Rob did not appear. She told herself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for a friend who had helped her in a dark moment. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something about Rob Thomas that drew her in, something solid and honest that was the opposite of everything Charles had turned out to be. 6 weeks after the canceled wedding, on a Sunday afternoon, when the store was closed and Rebecca had a rare day off, she decided to take Rob up on his standing invitation to visit the Double T Ranch. She borrowed a horse from the livery stable, ignoring the knowing look the stablemaster gave her, and followed the north road out of Lovelock into the open desert. The Double T Ranch sat in a valley between two rocky hills, sheltered from the worst of the desert winds. As Rebecca rode up the long drive, she could see the main house, a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch, along with several outbuildings, a large barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a smithy, and various corrals and paddocks. Cattle grazed in the near pasture, and she could see several horses in the corrals, beautiful animals with sleek coats that gleamed in the sunlight. Rob emerged from the barn before she reached the house, wiping his hands on his jeans. His face broke into a wide smile when he saw her. "Miss Johnson, this is a surprise. A good surprise," he added quickly. "I am glad you came." Rebecca dismounted, suddenly feeling shy. "I hope I am not intruding. You said I was welcome to visit, and I had the day off, so I thought—" "You are not intruding at all," Rob assured her, taking her horse's reins and looping them over a hitching post. "Let me show you around. Have you ever been on a working ranch before?" "No," Rebecca admitted. "I grew up in Sacramento. The closest I ever came to ranch life was seeing cattle drives pass through town, on their way to the stockyards." Rob's eyes lit up with enthusiasm, and for the next hour, he showed her every corner of the Double T Ranch. He introduced her to the other ranch hands, a motley collection of men ranging from fresh-faced boys to grizzled veterans. He showed her the cattle, explaining the different breeds and their purposes. He took her into the barn where the horses were stabled, and Rebecca found herself enchanted by the beautiful animals, their soft noses and intelligent eyes. "This is Rosie," Rob said, stopping at a stall where a mare stood with a tiny foal at her side. "She is the one who foaled 6 weeks ago, the night after I first met you. This is her colt, and he does not have a name yet. Would you like to name him?" Rebecca looked at the spindly-legged foal, all awkward angles and big eyes. "Me? Why would you let me name him?" Rob shrugged, leaning against the stall door. "Because I want to. Because every time I call his name, I will think of you. Is that so terrible?" Their eyes met, and Rebecca felt her breath catch. There was no mistaking the meaning behind his words, the warmth in his gaze. "I think you should call him Lucky," she said softly. "Because he is lucky to be born here, in such a beautiful place, to such a good mother. And because I feel lucky, too, to have found a friend when I needed one most." "Just a friend?" Rob asked quietly, and there was vulnerability in his expression that made Rebecca's heart ache. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, feeling the strength and warmth of him through the cotton of his shirt. "I do not know, Rob. 6 weeks ago, I was supposed to be getting married. I was supposed to be starting a new life with a man I thought I loved. Instead, I found out that man was a liar and a gambler who cared more about cards than about me. I am still trying to figure out who I am now, what I want from life. It would not be fair to you to rush into something when I am still sorting through all of that." Rob covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers gentle. "I understand. And I do not want to rush you or push you into anything you are not ready for. But I want you to know, Rebecca, that what I feel for you is not just sympathy or friendship. From the moment I saw you sitting in the desert in that wedding dress, trying so hard to be brave even though your world had just fallen apart, I knew you were someone special. The more I have gotten to know you over these past weeks, the more certain I have become. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were different from the bitter tears she had cried that first night. These were tears of gratitude and hope, and something that felt dangerously close to joy. "You are a good man, Rob Thomas, better than I deserve. You deserve the world," Rob said fiercely. "You deserve someone who will work hard for your future instead of gambling it away. Someone who will build a life with you, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, day by day. Someone who will put you first, always. You deserve all of that and more, Rebecca Jane Johnson." They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses and the sweet smell of hay, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around her heart after Charles's betrayal began to crack, letting in light and warmth. She was not ready yet. Not quite, but she could feel herself moving toward readiness, toward the possibility of love again. Rob seemed to sense the change in her. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it and stepped back. "Come on, let me introduce you to Mr. Taylor. He has been curious about you ever since I told him about what happened with Charles." Theodore Taylor was in the main house, a sturdy building furnished simply but comfortably. He was a man in his early 70s with white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Rebecca warmly, insisted she stay for supper, and proceeded to spend the next 2 hours telling stories about the early days of the ranch, when Nevada was still a wild and barely settled territory. "Rob here is the best thing that ever happened to this place," Mr. Taylor said, over plates of beef stew and fresh bread. came to me 5 years ago, greener than grass. But he had that quality you cannot teach. He cared. He cared about the animals, about the land, about doing things right instead of doing them fast. I have been trying to convince him to buy the ranch from me for the past year, but he is too stubborn to take charity. It is not charity I object to, Rob said mildly. It is the price. You keep offering to sell me the double T for half of what it is worth, Mr. Taylor. That is not a business transaction. That is a gift. And why should I not give you a gift? Mr. Taylor demanded. You have given me 5 years of your life, turned this place around, made it profitable when I was running it into the ground. My son does not want it. I have no grandchildren. Who else am I going to leave it to? The bank? Rebecca watched the affectionate argument between the two men and saw the deep respect and fondness that ran both ways. It said something about Rob's character that he had inspired such loyalty in his employer that he refused to take advantage of the old man's generosity, even when it would benefit him greatly. The sun was setting by the time Rebecca prepared to ride back to Lovelock. Rob walked her out to where her borrowed horse was waiting, his own horse already saddled beside it. I will ride with you back to town, he said. It is not safe to be out alone after dark. They rode together through the cooling desert evening, the sky above them painted in shades of purple and deep blue. The stars were beginning to emerge, brighter and more numerous than Rebecca had ever seen them in California. The vastness of the desert no longer felt threatening to her. Instead, it felt full of possibility, of room to grow and change and become someone new. Thank you for today, Rebecca said as they approached the outskirts of Lovelock, for showing me the ranch, for introducing me to Mr. Taylor, for everything. I had a wonderful time. You are welcome anytime, Rob said. I meant that. Even if we are just friends, Rebecca, I want you in my life. You make everything better just by being around. They stopped in front of the boarding house, and Rob helped Rebecca dismount. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and she found herself not wanting him to let go. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She leaned up and kissed him on the cheek, a brief touch of her lips against his sun-bronzed skin. "Good night, Rob," she whispered. "I will see you soon." She could feel him watching her as she walked up the steps to the boarding house, could feel the warmth of that gaze like sunshine on her back. When she reached the door and looked back, he was still there, sitting on his horse in the gathering darkness, and the smile on his face was visible even in the dim light from the street lamps. The weeks turned into months, and summer gave way to fall. The brutal heat of the Nevada desert mellowed into warm days and cool nights. Rebecca settled more fully into her life in Lovelock, no longer feeling like an outsider, but like someone who belonged. She made friends among the women of the town, joined the church social committee, became a fixture at community gatherings. When people mentioned Charles Whitmore, it was usually to shake their heads over his latest gambling loss or drunken escapade, and Rebecca felt nothing but a distant pity for him. Her relationship with Rob deepened and evolved in those months, moving from friendship towards something more profound. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes in town, when Rob came in for supplies, sometimes at the ranch when Rebecca rode out on her days off. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Rob told her about growing up on his family's ranch in Texas, about the drought that had killed their cattle and forced them to sell, about his father's heartbreak and death shortly after. Rebecca told him about her grandmother, about learning to sew as a little girl, about the dreams she had once had of opening her own dress shop. "You still could," Rob said one afternoon in late September. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the desert hills. "Open a dress shop, I mean. Lovelock could use one. Right now, people have to order their fancy clothes from catalogs or go all the way to Carson City." Rebecca considered the idea, which was not the first time she had thought about it. "It would take money to start a business like that. I would need fabric, a sewing machine, a space to work. I am saving what I can from my wages at the general store, but it will take time to accumulate enough." "Time we have plenty of," Rob said. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It had become a familiar gesture between them, this casual touching, these moments of comfortable physical closeness. "I have been thinking about the future a lot lately, Rebecca, about what I want from life, what kind of man I want to be." "And what have you decided?" Rebecca asked, turning to look at him. Rob met her gaze steadily. I decided that I want to be the kind of man who builds things, a ranch, a family, a life that means something. I decided that I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Rebecca felt her heart skip a beat. They had been dancing around this conversation for months, both of them aware of where they were heading, but taking their time, building a foundation of friendship and trust before constructing anything more. "Rob, I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since that first night when you told Charles the wedding was off, when you walked away from him with your head held high, even though you were breaking inside. I have loved you through every conversation we have had, every smile you have given me, every moment we have spent together. I know it has only been a few months. I know you might not be ready to hear this, but I needed you to know how I feel." Rebecca felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I did not think I could feel this way again, not after Charles. I thought he had broken something in me that could not be fixed. But you proved me wrong. Rob, you showed me what love is supposed to look like, how it is supposed to feel. You have been patient and kind and honest with me from the very beginning. How could I not love you?" Rob pulled her close, and Rebecca went willingly, wrapping her arms around him. They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear, and Rebecca felt a peace she had not known in a very long time. This was what she had been missing with Charles, this sense of safety, of being cherished, of being with someone who put her first. When they finally pulled apart, Rob cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I want to marry you, Rebecca. Not right away, not until you were ready, but someday. I want to build a life with you. I want to buy the double tea from Mr. Taylor and raise horses and cattle. I want to help you open your dress shop if that is what you want. I want to have children with you, fill a house with love and laughter. I want to grow old with you. Will you think about that? Will you think about a future with me?" "I do not need to think about it," Rebecca said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, Rob. Yes to all of it. Yes to marrying you. Yes to building a life together. Yes to everything. You are the best man I have ever known, and I would be honored to be your wife." Rob let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral and spun Rebecca around, making her laugh. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste pecks on the cheek they had exchanged before. This was a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally came up for air, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. "We should do this properly," Rob said, still holding her close. "I do not have a ring yet, but I will get one. And I will ask Mr. Taylor for his blessing, and you should talk to Mrs. Patterson. And we should plan a proper wedding, something beautiful that you deserve." "I do not need beautiful," Rebecca said, touching his face gently. "I just need you. But yes, let us do it properly. Let us take our time and plan something that reflects who we are together." They agreed to wait until spring for the wedding, giving them time to save money and make preparations. Rob worked out an arrangement with Mr. Taylor to begin buying the Double T Ranch on a payment plan, refusing to accept charity but agreeing to a fair price. Rebecca continued working at the general store, putting every spare penny into her savings, dreaming of the dress shop she would open once she was settled at the ranch. The news of their engagement spread through Lovelock like wildfire, generating far more positive gossip than Rebecca's broken engagement to Charles had. The women of the town were thrilled, many of them having developed a soft spot for the jilted bride who had picked herself up and made a new life. The men respected Rob and were happy to see him settling down with a good woman. Even Mrs. Chen, normally sparing with praise, admitted that Rebecca had made an excellent choice. Charles Whitmore heard about the engagement, of course, and predictably showed up drunk at the general store one afternoon in October to make a scene. "You said you loved me," he slurred, knocking over a display of canned goods. "You said we were going to spend our lives together. Now you are marrying some cowboy you have known for a few months?" Rebecca faced him calmly, no longer afraid or upset by his outbursts. "I said those things to a man who does not exist anymore, Charles. The man I thought you were would never have gambled away our future. The man you have become is not someone I can love or respect. I am sorry you are hurting, but that is not my responsibility. You need to let me go and figure out your own life." "I can win the money back," Charles insisted, grasping at her arm. "Give me another chance, Rebecca, please. I can change. I can be better." Rebecca pulled her arm free, and her voice was firm when she spoke. "No, Charles. You had your chance, and you threw it away. I am with Rob now, and I am happy. Happier than I ever was with you, if I am being honest. Now please leave before I have the sheriff remove you." Charles left, muttering curses under his breath, and that was the last time he tried to win Rebecca back. She heard later that he had left Lovelock entirely, heading north toward Winnemucca with empty pockets and broken dreams. She hoped he would find whatever he was looking for, but she no longer cared enough to worry about it. Winter came to the Nevada desert, bringing cold nights and occasional dustings of snow on the distant mountains. Rebecca spent her evenings sewing her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim. Unlike the store-bought dress she had planned to wear for her wedding to Charles, this dress was made with her own hands, every stitch infused with love and hope. Rob spent his evenings at the ranch, working on fixing up the main house for when Rebecca would move in after the wedding. He repaired the roof, reinforced the porch, built new furniture for the bedroom they would share. Mr. Taylor supervised and offered advice, clearly delighted that his beloved ranch would remain in good hands after his death. They saw each other every Sunday, their day of rest, and Rob would drive into town in a wagon to pick Rebecca up and take her to the ranch for the day. They would spend hours talking and planning, discussing what kind of cattle to raise, where to put Rebecca's dress shop once they built it, how many children they wanted. On those cold winter Sundays, wrapped in blankets on the porch, watching the snow fall on the distant peaks, Rebecca felt more content than she had ever been. In February, just 2 months before the planned wedding, disaster nearly struck. A fire broke out in the barn at the Double T Ranch, started by a knocked-over lantern. Rob and the other ranch hands managed to get all the animals out safely, but the barn itself was a total loss, burned to the ground along with months' worth of stored hay and grain. When Rebecca heard the news, she rode out to the ranch immediately, her heart in her throat. She found Rob standing in front of the smoking ruins, his face blackened with soot, his eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. When he saw her, his expression crumpled, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "It is all gone," he said hoarsely. "The barn, the hay, the tack, everything. It will cost hundreds of dollars to rebuild, money I do not have. I was planning to use my savings to finish paying off Mr. Taylor for the ranch, but now I will have to use it for this instead. Rebecca, I am so sorry, but we might have to postpone the wedding. I cannot ask you to marry me when I do not know if I can even keep this ranch running." Rebecca pulled back and looked at him fiercely. "Rob Thomas, you listen to me. We are not postponing anything. That fire does not change how I feel about you or my commitment to building a life together. If we need to delay buying the ranch from Mr. Taylor, we will delay. If we need to rebuild slowly over time, we will rebuild. If we need to live in a smaller house or eat simpler meals for a while, we will do that. But we are getting married in April as planned, and we are facing this challenge together. Do you understand?" Rob stared at her, and slowly, a smile began to spread across his soot-stained face. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You rode out into the desert to check on a crying woman in a wedding dress," Rebecca reminded him. "You were kind when you could have just ridden past. Everything good that has happened since then is because you chose to be a good man, Rob. Now, let us figure out how to handle this." They did figure it out, with help from unexpected sources. When word of the fire spread through Lovelock, the community rallied around Rob and the Double T Ranch. The miners, many of whom had come to respect Rebecca during her time working at the general store, organized a fundraising dance with all proceeds going toward rebuilding the barn. The other ranchers in the area donated hay and grain to get the Double T through the rest of the winter. The church ladies held bake sales and quilting bees, raising money $1 at a time. Most surprising of all, Mr. Taylor tore up the payment plan contract Rob had signed and drew up a new one. "You will buy this ranch from me for $1, the old man said firmly when Rob protested. "And before you start arguing about charity, hear me out. That barn burned because I insisted on storing lanterns in there, despite you telling me it was a fire hazard. You were right, and I was a stubborn old fool. This is my way of making amends. Besides, I have no one else to leave this place to, and I will sleep better knowing it is in your hands, so stop being noble and just say thank you." Rob, overcome with emotion, could only nod and shake the old man's hand. That night, he told Rebecca about Mr. Taylor's incredible generosity, and they held each other and cried together, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming kindness of people who had become their community, their family. By mid-March, with the help of volunteers from Lovelock and surrounding ranches, a new barn stood where the old one had burned. It was larger than the original, with better ventilation and a safer design for storing equipment. Rob worked from dawn until dusk every day, alongside men who had no obligation to help, but did so anyway because that was what neighbors did for each other in the harsh Nevada territory. Rebecca, for her part, threw herself into the final preparations for the wedding. She finished her dress, made new curtains for the ranch house, organized the food and flowers, and all the hundreds of small details that went into planning a ceremony. Mrs. Patterson offered to host the reception at the boarding house, and Mrs. Chen gave Rebecca a generous bonus to help cover expenses. The morning of April 15, 1883, dawned clear and beautiful, with temperatures already climbing toward what promised to be a warm spring day. Rebecca woke early in her room at the boarding house and looked at herself in the mirror. She was 23 years old, nearly 10 months past the day she was supposed to have married Charles Whitmore. The woman looking back at her from the glass was different from that frightened, betrayed girl in the cream-colored wedding dress. This woman was stronger, more confident, more certain of what she wanted from life. Mrs. Patterson came in to help her dress, along with several other women from town. They laced her into her corset, helped her step into the ivory silk dress, arranged her dark hair in an elaborate updo decorated with wildflowers from the desert. When they were finished, Rebecca barely recognized herself. She looked like a bride, yes, but more than that, she looked happy. The wedding was held at the small church on the edge of town, with what seemed like the entire population of Lovelock in attendance. Rebecca walked down the aisle alone, having no father or male relative to give her away. But she did not feel alone. The community that had embraced her, that had helped her rebuild her life, surrounded her with love and support. And at the end of that aisle stood Rob Thomas, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him, in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his brown eyes shining with love and pride. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, she felt complete in a way she never had with Charles. This was right. This was real. This was the future she was meant to have. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Rob kissed Rebecca with a tenderness that made several women in the congregation dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception at the boarding house was a lively affair, with music and dancing and more food than Rebecca had seen in one place since leaving California. Rob danced with her again, and with Mrs. Patterson, and with Mrs. Chen, and with every other woman who had helped them reach this day. Rebecca danced with Mr. Taylor, who told her that she had made Rob the happiest man in Nevada, and that she should never let him forget how lucky he was. As the sun began to set and the party started to wind down, Rob and Rebecca slipped away to the wagon that would carry them to their new home at the Double T Ranch. The back was filled with wedding gifts, quilts and dishes and tools and all manner of practical items they would need to build their life together. They rode out of Lovelock as the stars began to appear, following the familiar north road toward the ranch. Rebecca leaned against Rob's shoulder, exhausted but happy, watching the desert landscape roll past. "Are you glad we did this?" she asked. "The wedding, I mean. All of it?" Rob wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Glad does not even begin to cover it, Mrs. Thomas. Today was the best day of my life. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Rebecca assured him. "From that very first night, you have been everything I needed. You saw me at my worst, when my life had just fallen apart, and you did not judge me or pity me. You just helped me, expecting nothing in return. You let me take my time figuring out my feelings. You built a foundation of friendship before we built anything else. You are a good man, Rob Thomas, and I am so grateful to be your wife." They reached the Double T Ranch as the last light was fading from the sky. Rob carried Rebecca over the threshold of the ranch house, making her laugh and set her down gently in the main room. He had lit lanterns throughout the house, casting everything in a warm golden glow. Flowers from the wedding decorated every surface, and their marriage bed had been made up with a beautiful new quilt, a gift from the church ladies. That night, they began their life together as husband and wife, and Rebecca felt no fear or uncertainty. This was where she was meant to be, with this man, building this life. Everything that had happened before, all the pain and betrayal and heartbreak with Charles, had led her to this moment. She would not wish away those experiences, as difficult as they had been, because they had taught her what real love looked like, what a true partnership should be. The months that followed were hard work, but filled with joy. Rebecca and Rob settled into the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to feed animals and handle the endless tasks that came with maintaining the double T. Rebecca discovered that she loved ranch work, loved being outside in the fresh air, loved working alongside her husband toward common goals. She also began planning her dress shop, sketching designs and saving money, dreaming of the day when she could open the doors to her own business. In July, they learned that Rebecca was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and a touch of fear, as parenthood would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But they faced it as they faced everything, together with determination and love. Mr. Taylor, whose health had been declining, passed away peacefully in his sleep in August. He left the Double T Ranch to Rob officially in his will, along with a small sum of money and a letter telling Rob that he was the son he had always wished for. The funeral was well attended, and Rob delivered a eulogy that left no dry eyes in the church. He spoke of Mr. Taylor's kindness, his wisdom, his generosity, and promised to honor his memory by making the Double T the finest ranch in Nevada. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. She continued working at the ranch as long as she was able, then shifted to lighter tasks as her belly grew. Rob was solicitous and protective, sometimes overly so, making Rebecca laugh when he tried to prevent her from doing anything more strenuous than sitting in a chair. Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1884, after a labor that lasted through the night. Rob paced the floor while the doctor and a midwife attended to Rebecca. And when he finally heard his son's first cry, he burst into the bedroom with tears streaming down his face. Rebecca, exhausted but radiant, held out the baby for him to take, and Rob cradled the tiny life they had created with wonder and awe. They named him Theodore Taylor Thomas, after the man who had given Rob his start in life, and called him Teddy for short. He was a healthy, loud baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Rob proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint, rocking Teddy for hours when he was fussy. When Teddy was 6 months old, Rebecca finally opened her dress shop in Lovelock. It was a small space rented from Mrs. Chen, located next to the general store, but it was all hers. She called it Rebecca's Fine Dresses and Alterations, and within weeks, she had more business than she could handle. Women came from Lovelock and surrounding towns to order custom dresses, have their old garments altered, and browse the ready-made items Rebecca created in her spare time. The years rolled on, bringing new challenges and new joys. The Double T Ranch prospered under Rob's careful management, becoming known throughout the region for its quality horses. Rebecca's dress shop expanded, eventually taking over a larger building on Main Street and employing 2 young women to help with the sewing. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose in 1886 and another son they called James in 1889. Their children grew up surrounded by love and the wide-open spaces of the Nevada desert. Teddy learned to ride before he could read, following his father around the ranch and absorbing everything Rob could teach him about horses and cattle. Rose proved to have her mother's gift for sewing, spending hours at the dress shop, even as a little girl. James was the adventurous one, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries, keeping his parents on their toes. As the years passed, Lovelock grew and changed. The railroad came through in 1891, bringing new businesses and new people. The population swelled, and the rough mining town gradually became a proper community with schools and churches and civic organizations. Rebecca and Rob were pillars of that community, respected for their hard work and their generosity. They never forgot the kindness shown to them when the barn burned, and they made it a point to help others facing hard times, whether through donations of food and supplies or simply through offering friendship and support. Charles Whitmore became a distant memory, occasionally mentioned when old-timers told stories about the early days of Lovelock. Rebecca heard through the grapevine that he had eventually made his way to San Francisco, where he continued gambling and drinking until his death in the early 1890s. She felt a pang of sadness when she heard the news, mourning not the man he had become, but the man he might have been if he had made different choices. On their 10th wedding anniversary in April of 1893, Rob and Rebecca took a rare day away from the ranch and the dress shop to have a picnic at the spot where they first met, the rock outcropping on the edge of town, where Rebecca had sat crying in her wedding dress a decade earlier. So much had changed since that terrible day, and yet the desert landscape remained the same, eternal and unchanging. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had married Charles?" Rob asked, lying on his back with his head in Rebecca's lap, watching clouds drift across the bright blue sky. Rebecca ran her fingers through his hair, now shot through with a few strands of gray at the temples. "Sometimes, but only to be grateful that I did not. If he had not gambled away our wedding fund, if I had married him, I would never have met you. I would never have built this life, had our children found true happiness. In a strange way, Charles did me the greatest favor of my life by showing me who he really was before it was too late." "I used to think I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time," Rob mused. "Lucky that I happened to be in town that day. Lucky that I saw you leaving. Lucky that I decided to follow you to make sure you were safe. But it was not just luck, was it? It was 1,000 small choices that led me to that moment, and 1,000 more that came after. Every day I chose to be the kind of man who would not ride past a woman in distress. Every day I chose to put you first, to build something real with you instead of making empty promises. Those were not accidents. Those were decisions." Rebecca leaned down and kissed him, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of sunshine and possibility. "You were right that first night, you know, when you told me I deserved better than Charles. I did deserve better. I deserved you, even though I did not realize it yet. Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal and find my way to you. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They lay there in the desert afternoon, wrapped in each other's arms, while their children played nearby and the horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, they could see the smoke from chimneys in Lovelock, could hear the faint whistle of a train passing through. This was their home, their community, their world. It was not the life Rebecca had imagined 10 years ago when she was planning to marry Charles Whitmore, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Rob and Rebecca packed up their picnic and gathered their children for the ride back to the Double T Ranch. Teddy helped his father hitch up the horses, while Rose and James collected wildflowers for their mother. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary day, the kind that made up the fabric of a life well lived. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the ranch was quiet, Rob and Rebecca sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. Rob had his arm around Rebecca's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the comfortable ease of a decade together. "Do you remember the first time we sat on this porch?" Rebecca asked. "It was the day you showed me the ranch, back when I was still trying to figure out what I wanted from life." "I remember," Rob said. "That was the day you named Lucky, the foal. He is still one of the best horses we have ever raised. Every time I see him, I think of you standing in that barn, looking at that gangly foal like he was the most beautiful thing you had ever seen." "That was the day I started to realize I was falling in love with you," Rebecca admitted. "Not that I was ready to admit it to myself yet, but something shifted that day. I saw you with the horses, with Mr. Taylor, with the other ranch hands. I saw the life you had built through hard work and integrity. I saw the man you were, not just the knight in shining armor who had rescued me, but the real person underneath. And I wanted to be part of your world." Rob tightened his arm around her. "You are not just part of my world, Rebecca. You are my world. You and the children, this ranch, the life we have built together. Everything good in my life came from that decision to ride out into the desert to check on a crying woman in a wedding dress. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through sagebrush, the gentle sounds of horses in the barn. Inside the house, one of the children stirred in sleep, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back down. These were the sounds of home, of family, of everything that mattered. "I have been thinking," Rebecca said eventually. "Teddy is 10 years old now, old enough to start helping more seriously with the ranch. And I have enough business at the dress shop that I could afford to hire another seamstress. Maybe it is time we started thinking about expanding the ranch, buying more land, raising more horses. We could make the Double T even bigger than Mr. Taylor ever imagined." Rob smiled in the darkness. I like the way you think, Mrs. Thomas. You always have been good at seeing possibilities where others see limitations. What did you have in mind? They spent the next hour discussing plans and dreams, just as they had done so many times over the years. They talked about buying the property to the east, which had recently come up for sale. They talked about breeding programs for their horses, about which bloodlines to pursue. They talked about expanding Rebecca's dress shop to include ready-made clothing for men and children, not just women. They talked about the future they were building, brick by brick, day by day, for themselves and for their children. By the time they finally went to bed, the moon had risen high in the sky, bathing the ranch in silver light. Rebecca lay in Rob's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful for the unexpected path her life had taken. 10 years ago, she had thought her life was over, that she would never recover from Charles's betrayal. Instead, she had found something infinitely better, a true partnership, a real love, a life built on honesty and hard work and mutual respect. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring gave way to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter, and then back to spring again. The children grew taller and more capable, taking on increasing responsibilities around the ranch and at the dress shop. Teddy proved to have his father's gift with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animal with soft words and patient handling. Rose developed into an accomplished seamstress, her stitches neat and precise, her eye for design showing early promise. James, true to his adventurous nature, was always the first to volunteer for any task that involved exploration or excitement. In 1895, when Teddy was 11, Rose 9, and James 6, the family took a trip back to Sacramento so Rebecca could visit her childhood home and introduce her family to the friends and relatives she had left behind. It was a bittersweet journey, as Rebecca saw how much the city had changed and grown in the years since she had left. The dress shop where she had worked was gone, replaced by a larger department store. The boarding house where she had lived had been torn down to make way for a new hotel. Many of the people she had known had moved away or passed on. But there were still a few familiar faces, including an old friend from the dress shop who invited Rebecca and her family to dinner. Over the meal, the friend asked the question Rebecca had been dreading. Whatever happened to that man you were engaged to? Charles, something or other? Rebecca exchanged a glance with Rob before answering. Charles Whitmore. We did not get married. He gambled away our wedding fund and most of my savings about 3 months before the ceremony. I called off the engagement. Her friend gasped in shock and sympathy. Oh, Rebecca, I am so sorry. That must have been devastating. It was at the time, Rebecca admitted, but it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. If I had married Charles, I would never have met Rob. I would never have had my children or built my life in Nevada. Sometimes what looks like the worst disaster is actually the beginning of something wonderful. Rob reached over and squeezed her hand under the table, and Rebecca saw the love and pride in his eyes. Their children, listening to the story, exchanged confused glances, unable to imagine their mother with anyone other than their father. To them, Rob and Rebecca had always been together, a unit as solid and unchanging as the mountains. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed of their Sacramento hotel room, Rebecca thought about the woman she had been when she lived in this city. Young, naive, trusting Charles Whitmore with her heart and her future, without really knowing who he was underneath the charm and the promises. She had grown so much since then, had learned so much about what really mattered in life. She was grateful for those lessons, even though they had come at a painful cost. No regrets? Rob whispered in the darkness, as though reading her thoughts. Not a single one, Rebecca replied firmly. Not about Charles, not about coming to Nevada, not about any of it. Every choice I made, every challenge I faced, led me to you and to this life we have built. How could I regret any of that? They returned to Lovelock after 2 weeks in California, and Rebecca found herself genuinely glad to be home. Nevada had become more than just the place where she lived. It was woven into her identity now, part of who she was. The desert landscape that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when she first arrived now felt like an old friend. The community that had been strangers when she stepped off the stagecoach had become her family. The Double T Ranch continued to thrive through the late 1890s and into the new century. By 1900, it was one of the largest and most successful ranches in the region, with over 200 head of cattle and a thriving horse breeding operation. Rebecca's dress shop had expanded into a general clothing store, employing 6 seamstresses and generating enough income to make Rebecca one of the more successful businesswomen in Nevada. Their children continued to grow and develop their own dreams. Teddy, at 16, was already being groomed to take over the ranch someday, working alongside his father from dawn until dusk and showing the same dedication and work ethic that had made Rob successful. Rose, at 14, had begun taking on more responsibility at the dress shop, and Rebecca recognized that her daughter would likely inherit the business when the time came. James, at 11, was still figuring out his path, but his love of books and learning suggested he might be the first member of the family to pursue higher education. On a spring evening in 1903, 20 years after their wedding, Rob and Rebecca once again found themselves sitting on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the desert. Their children were grown now, or nearly so. Teddy at 19 preparing to marry a sweet girl from town. Rose at 17 courting a young man who worked at the bank. James at 14 dreaming of attending college in California. 20 years, Rebecca mused, shaking her head in wonder. Has it really been that long? 20 of the best years of my life, Rob confirmed. 20 years of waking up next to you, of building this ranch together, of raising our children. I would not trade a single day of it. Rebecca looked at her husband, seeing the gray now liberally threaded through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes and mouth carved by decades of sun and smiles. He was 50 years old now, still strong and capable, but moving with the careful economy of motion that came with age and accumulated injuries. She knew she looked different too, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands roughened by years of work. But when Rob looked at her, she still saw the same love and admiration that had been there from the beginning. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Rebecca asked. "When you told me I deserved better than Charles?" "I remember every word of that conversation," Rob replied. "You were so brave, so heartbroken, but still so strong. I fell in love with you that night, watching you walk away from a man who did not deserve you. I did not know it yet, but I knew I wanted to be the kind of man who did deserve you. You were always that man," Rebecca said softly. "From the moment you chose to follow me into the desert to make sure I was safe, you were that man. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real partnership should be. You kept every promise you ever made to me, and made me promises I never thought to ask for. You built this life with me, day by day, year by year. How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I was the lucky one," Rob insisted. "I was just a ranch hand with big dreams and empty pockets. You could have had anyone, could have gone back to California and found someone with money and prospects. But you chose me, chose this life, chose to build something from nothing with your own 2 hands. You made me better than I ever could have been on my own." They fell into companionable silence, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their children moving about, preparing for the evening meal, arguing good-naturedly about some trivial matter. These were the sounds of a life well lived, of a family bound together by love and respect and shared history. As the years continued to pass, Rob and Rebecca watched their children establish their own lives and families. Teddy married his sweetheart in 1904 and took over day-to-day management of the Double T Ranch, though Rob remained an active presence and advisor. Teddy and his wife gave Rob and Rebecca their first grandchild, a little girl they named Rebecca after her grandmother, in 1905. Rose married her banker and opened a second location of Rebecca's fine dresses in Reno, the growing city to the southwest. She proved to have her mother's business acumen and then some, expanding the operation into a small empire of clothing stores across Nevada. She gave Rob and Rebecca 2 grandsons, born in 1908 and 1910. James defied everyone's expectations by announcing he wanted to be a doctor. He attended the University of California and then medical school, eventually returning to Nevada to establish a practice in Lovelock. He married a nurse he met during his training, and they gave Rob and Rebecca 3 more grandchildren. Rob and Rebecca gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch and the dress shop, content to let their capable children take the reins. They spent their days working at a more leisurely pace, advising when asked, enjoying their grandchildren, and marveling at the legacy they had built. The Double T Ranch, which Mr. Taylor had given to Rob for $1 30 years earlier, was now a thriving operation worth thousands of dollars and employing dozens of people. Rebecca's dress shop, started in a tiny rented space with barely enough money for fabric and thread, had become a multi-location business known throughout the region for quality and fair dealing. On their 30th anniversary in April of 1913, their children organized a surprise party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the region. Over 100 people showed up to celebrate Rob and Rebecca, to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There were speeches and toasts, stories told about Rob's fairness and integrity, about Rebecca's kindness and business sense, about the way they had built something remarkable together. When it was Rob's turn to speak, he stood with Rebecca's hand in his and looked out at the assembled crowd. 30 years ago, he began, I rode out into the desert to check on a woman who was sitting alone in her wedding dress, crying because the man she was supposed to marry had betrayed her trust. I had no idea that decision would change my life, that this woman would become my wife, my partner, my best friend, and the mother of my children. But Rebecca has been all of those things and more. She has made me a better man, made my dreams bigger and more ambitious than I ever imagined. Every good thing in my life came from that moment when I chose to help a stranger in need. So, I guess the moral of the story is this. Be kind, help people when you can, and you never know what blessings might come your way. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished, and Rebecca had to wipe away her own tears before she could respond. Rob told you about the night we met, she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. But what he did not tell you is what he said to me that night. He said I deserved better than a man who would gamble away our future. And he was right. I did deserve better. I deserved him. I deserved a man who would work hard for our dreams instead of throwing them away. I deserved a man who would be my partner in every sense of the word, who would support my ambitions while pursuing his own. I deserved a man who would love me through good times and bad, through success and failure, through every challenge life threw at us. Rob Thomas has been that man for 30 years, and I fall more in love with him every single day. Thank you all for celebrating this milestone with us. But more than that, thank you for being part of our community, our extended family. We could not have built this life without all of you. The party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Rob and Rebecca danced together as they had at their wedding 30 years earlier, moving with the ease of long practice, anticipating each other's movements without conscious thought. This was what 3 decades together looked like, a partnership so deep and intuitive that they moved as one, thought as one, dreamed as one. As they grew older still, Rob's knees began to trouble him from years of hard ranch work, and Rebecca's eyes grew weaker from decades of fine stitching. They slowed down, took more time for rest, learned to accept help from their children and grandchildren. But they never stopped working entirely, never stopped being engaged in the ranch and the business and the community. They were fixtures at church on Sundays, at town council meetings, at school functions for their grandchildren. In the summer of 1922, just shy of their 40th anniversary, Mr. Theodore Taylor's great-nephew came to Nevada from back east, researching the family history. He wanted to know about his great-uncle who had owned a ranch in Nevada, wanted to understand what kind of man he had been. Rob and Rebecca spent an afternoon with him on the porch of the ranch house, sharing stories and memories. My great-uncle never married, never had children, the young man said. I always wondered why, what made him so different from the rest of the family. I think he was married to this ranch, Rob said thoughtfully. This land, these animals, this life, that was his family. And at the end, he found a way to pass it on to someone who would love it as much as he did. I like to think he died content, knowing the double T would be cared for long after he was gone. The young man looked around at the thriving ranch, at the well-maintained buildings and healthy animals, at Rob and Rebecca's children and grandchildren running about. It looks like he chose well. You have built something remarkable here. I think my great-uncle would be proud. After the young man left, Rob and Rebecca sat in silence for a long time, thinking about Mr. Taylor and all the other people who had helped them along the way. Mrs. Patterson, who had vouched for Rebecca when she needed work. Mrs. Chen, who had given her that first job. The community of Lovelock, who had rallied around them when the barn burned. All the customers and ranch hands and friends and neighbors who had been part of their journey. We did not build this life alone, Rebecca said finally. We had so much help, so much support. We were blessed with good people who believed in us. We were, Rob agreed. But we also worked our tails off and never gave up, even when things were hard. We earned this, Rebecca. We earned every bit of it through honest work and integrity and treating people right. Yes, we had help, but we also helped ourselves and helped others along the way. That is what building a life is all about. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in April of 1923 with a smaller gathering, just family and close friends. Rob was 70 years old now, still sharp mentally, but moving more slowly, his body bearing the accumulated wear and tear of a lifetime of physical labor. Rebecca, at 64, had retired from active involvement in the dress shop, but still sewed occasionally, creating elaborate quilts for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Their children were all successful in their own right, with families and businesses and lives that made Rob and Rebecca proud. Teddy, at 39, had expanded the Double T Ranch significantly and was training his own son to take over someday. Rose, at 37, had built her clothing business into a regional success story. James, at 34, was a respected doctor in Lovelock, caring for the same community that had supported his parents for over 4 decades. "We did good, did we not?" Rob whispered to Rebecca as they watched their assembled family. "All those years ago, when you were crying in the desert and I was just a ranch hand with dreams bigger than my wallet, we could not have imagined all of this." "No, we could not have," Rebecca agreed. "But we built it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. That is the secret, I think. We never gave up on each other or on our dreams. We just kept working, kept believing, kept loving. And look what we created. Not just a successful ranch and business, but a family. A legacy that will continue long after we are gone." As the sun set on their 40th anniversary, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and rose, Rob and Rebecca sat together on the porch of the house they had made into a home. 4 decades had passed since that fateful day, when Charles Whitmore gambled away their wedding fund, since Rob had ridden out into the desert to check on a crying woman in a wedding dress. 4 decades of hard work and challenges overcome, of joys celebrated and sorrows endured together, of a love that had only deepened with time. "I would do it all again," Rebecca said softly. "Every single bit of it, even the hard parts, because it all led to this, to us, to everything we have built together." Rob kissed her temple gently, his lips lingering on her silver hair. "So would I. You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Rebecca Thomas. Still the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I know. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you even more tomorrow." They sat there as darkness fell and the stars emerged, holding hands as they had done countless times over the years, drawing comfort and strength from each other's presence. Inside the house, their family laughed and celebrated, the sound of multiple generations gathered together in love and unity. This was the life they had built, the legacy they would leave behind. Not just property and businesses, but a family bound together by the example Rob and Rebecca had set of what true partnership and real love looked like. And on that warm April evening in 1923, as the desert breeze whispered through the sagebrush and the distant mountains stood eternal against the star-filled sky, Rob and Rebecca Thomas knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were always meant to find: each other, and in finding each other, themselves. Their story would be told and retold in Lovelock for generations to come, a tale of heartbreak transformed into hope, of betrayal that led to true love, of a cowboy who saw a crying woman in a wedding dress and decided to help, never knowing that simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever. It was a story that reminded people that sometimes the worst disasters were really blessings in disguise, that character mattered more than charm, that real love was built through daily choices and sustained effort rather than grand gestures and empty promises. And most importantly, it was a story that proved Rob right about what he had told Rebecca that very first night, standing in the desert as the sun set over the Nevada landscape. She had deserved better than Charles Whitmore, and in Rob Thomas, she had found exactly that, and so much more.